All right, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. We spend a lot of time at events like this talking about technology and process. Today, I want to talk about something different. How do you get the people who control the budget and the roadmap to actually understand the impact localization has for business? Our three panelists have figured that out, and they're here to share how. First, Kenny Emery, head of globalization at Tinder, where she leads globalization strategy across products and markets. Kenny has over 10 years of experience helping global brands resonate across cultures with a background spanning product localization, multicultural marketing, and expansion strategy. Next, Jerome Sellinger, a global growth and globalization leader with over 25 years at the intersection of language and technology. Jerome specializes in content globalization into a competitive edge, bringing both strategic and technical depth to the work of aligning product, engineering, and operations. And finally, Winnie Wong, localization lead at DoorDash, where she helps shape global product experiences and supports the internationalization tooling that enables teams to build at scale. Winnie brings a cross-functional perspective on adapting to AI-driven change while keeping quality and cultural relevance at the center. Now, let's get into it. Before you earned that seat at the table, what did the relationship between localization and executive leadership actually look like? Let's start with Jerome.
Well, first, I would say that localization was considered the last piece of the puzzle, the bottleneck that would slow down time to market, and also being seen as a cost center rather than a revenue center. And that's pretty common across the industry. I think it resonates with a lot of people around here. But lastly, the skills, lots of misconceptions about the skills. This is something that executives are not aware of. Are we internal translators, employees that speak the language, translate on their free time? Do you just pass the plate to translation vendors? Who guys are you?
Yeah, so I'll go next. The challenge for us wasn't that executive leadership didn't value localization. It was more that it didn't fully understand what it entailed. So early on, localization was often seen as just translation or something Google Translate could handle. But in reality, it goes much deeper, like cultural relevance, customer trust, and market readiness. So before we address this gap, we were usually brought in only when something needed to be translated instead of earlier, when product decisions and IT and tooling were still being shaped.
Yeah, I also agree with everything Jerome and Winnie said. We were also seen as a service provider and kind of the last step of the pipeline before product features went live. And I think our instinct was to highlight how much work we were doing, the volume, the speed, etc. But nobody really cared about those metrics. So we really had to fundamentally shift how we operated just across the company and how we positioned ourselves so that the company would stop seeing us as a service provider and instead as strategic business partners.
Yeah, that tension between the work you're proud of and the language that leadership actually speaks, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. So let's talk about what it actually takes to shift that, because at some point, something had to change in how you thought about this. What was the reframe and what did you have to stop leading with? Let's stick with Kenny.
Yeah, so for us, we really did move away from presenting outputs early. So instead of presenting, strings translated, like turnaround times, etc., we moved towards specific user behavior metrics, such as like onboarding completion, number of matches, messages sent, retention by market, all of the things that leadership actually cared about. And we started to sort of speak more in their language to better tailor, right, the work that we were doing to how it impacted the company. So for example, if for Tinder specifically, if we see strong acquisition but weak engagement, that usually signals to something not landing culturally. So that's how we can connect localization outcomes to solving business problems.
Yeah, Winnie, what do you think about that? And do you have a similar experience?
Yeah, so similar to Kenny, like metrics like turnaround time, word count, quality scores are important to the localization team, but they're not always what leadership use to make decision. So the aha moments for us was recognizing that we had to speak the language of the business, and that means talking about faster market launches, less operational blockers, strong customers trust, and more scalable global products. For example, if the payment experience, currency format, privacy wording, or refund expectations are not right, the it's not just a localization issue. It can affect conversion, support volumes, customers' confidence, risk, and market readiness. So the shift was moving from like here's what localization deliver to here's what localization enable for the business. Jerome,
Once you have
yeah.
Yeah, once you have that reframe internally, the next challenge is that the pitch has to change depending on who's in the room, right? So I know, Jerome, you've spent some time thinking about this. How do you tailor the story?
Before shifting the pitch, you have to understand who you're talking to. So my advice would be curious about who you're talking to. And there's different ways to do this. Many executives, like a CTO or a CPO, may have a company blog, for instance, or a Teams channel. So by just getting around there, you understand what their real struggles can be. So you can only address their concerns if you understand what they need. And it can be only localization, it can be more than just this. But altogether, yeah, that's a basic thing. You need to adjust your story to who you're talking to. But what I found too is that if you start talking to people who executives already know, then they hear from someone they trust. So your message gets easily in their attention, and you get the attention you need. But generally speaking, I think what works the best is not to demonstrate how much the company could make if they localize a product, a service, a feature. It's about showing how much they would lose if they don't. So I remember in a discussion explaining that Spanish and French alone, that's 600 million people you can talk to. And that shifts the direction of the discussion immediately.
Yeah, Winnie, what about you?
Uh, So, um, the pitch definitely changes depending on what you're talking to. So at DoorDash, our mission is to empower local economies. So when I talk to leaders, I connect localizations to the overall company mission. So for product teams, I would frame it around user experience and adoptions. Are we creating an experience that feels intuitive and easy to use for customers in each market? It is not just about language quality. It is about removing frictions and making the product feel like it was built for that market. For engineering, the conversation is about scalability and reducing manual overhead. So strong IT tooling, flexible product architecture, and earlier localization input help us reduce rework. And that means team can launch faster, support more markets, and enable local economy at scale. For marketing, the conversation is about performance, creativities, and brand perceptions. Our message is relevant, on brand, and culturally appropriate. Localization can directly impact campaign performance, customer engagement, and brand trust. And for finance, the story needs to connect to ROI. It's about showing how localization can make global expansions more efficient and cost effective. So the key is to start with what each team is accountable for, then show how localization helps them achieve that outcome.
Well, knowing what to say is one thing, but having the proof points to back it up is another. So let's get tactical about the specific moves that work. So could you walk me through a specific example of connecting localization impacts to a number an executive actually watches? Let's start with Jerome.
Showing executives the metrics that we care about, like TM reuse, for instance, TM savings, average cost per word, well, you get your audience lost. They don't understand any of this. So you need to focus about what they actually use. So what I found is that executives love Tableau reports. And I looked around and none of the existing reports showed how international revenue was tied to localization. That was very surprising. So what I did was work with the data engineer in charge, and I started doing some research, heavy research about English tolerance level, literacy, languages, countries, etc. Put together a huge table with all of this data and tied this data to the products and the revenue. So I ended up with this report that executives could play with, and how much we're making per language, per product, localized versus non-localized, all the regions. So tying revenue to, for instance, English tolerance and literacy is something that rose a lot of interest. They were not aware of this. Germany loves translated products, but they're experts at English. Who knows why? But that's the reality of the market. And as a concrete example, I remember a call with a product manager one day, and my budget was challenged. He wanted to remove some languages just to save some costs. And he just had his gut feel to motivate this decision. So what I did was just pause. I pulled my Tableau reports, adjusted the filtering, and showed that removing the 3 languages, which was about $25,000 altogether per year, would have put $350,000 of revenue at risk, because the 3 languages he wanted to remove were related to countries where tolerance on non-translated products was very low. And then, well, this budget was not a good challenge. It was logical to keep the languages.
Oh, that's a great example. Winnie, do you have an example to share with us?
Sure. So one approach that works is to connect localizations to a metrics that the business already tracks. So at DoorDash, one example is delivery quality. So we built a real-time translation engine for customers drop-off instructions so the Dasher can read them in their preferred language. This matters because when customers and Dasher use different languages, important details can get lost, and that can lead to delivery problems. So instead of framing it as we translated drop-off instructions, we tie the work to a business metric leaders deeply care about, which is never deliver order, or we call it ND. So this initiative helped reduce ND globally and created meaningful savings, and that make the impact clear. Localization is not just about language quality, it can also reduce delivery frictions and save money.
Those are really powerful examples, but I also want to look at the flip side here, because not everything works. So Kenny, let's start with you on this one. What have you tried that flat out didn't work, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I think with the nature of the work that we do, we're very passionate individuals about localization. And we used to speak a lot about evangelizing our, colleagues, right? How do we educate them about localization? How do we show them that this really matters? But the reality is that a lot of our brands are coming from the US. They have that US mindset, and they just don't, a lot of people don't understand the cultural and linguistic background that you need to have in order to understand why this matters. So we really had to show people how we basically impact, or I guess how not tailoring the experience to our localized or our global markets, I would say, would negatively impact the business. Like Jerome was saying, if he got rid of those 3 languages, like it would really impact the business in a negative way. And so we really have to shift our mindset to start thinking of, okay, how does not doing this culturally appropriately impact the user experience, impact our metrics, right? So I think we also spend a lot of time on just volume and speed metrics. And it just, again, it really never resonated with stakeholders. Like they don't really care about turnaround times all that much. So we had to really focus on those outcomes, like also not over attributing some of the impact to localization specifically. I think a lot of us know that we work very closely horizontally with teams across the company. So we're working with product, marketing, etc. So we partnered with them to have some KPIs that are joint and that we can track together. So if, for example, we help localize a marketing campaign, marketing can basically say, hey, we moved the needle in this direction with like brand awareness, then we can also say we attributed to that result. So showcasing how partnering with people, being strategic, creates business outcomes was something that eventually led to the shift. And, again, coming back full circle with what I said when I started, just really shifting the way that we were positioning ourselves from being strategic or from being a service provider to strategic partners.
Yeah, Jerome, same question.
Yeah, I second what you were saying about our tendency to translate everything all the time, all the languages. We preach for our own choir. We're passionate about what we do. But that's not enough. That's really not enough. Others are not. They have their own ways of thinking and seeing the business. So we have to give them results and information they need, period. Even if they don't resonate with us, we have to adapt to this. I remember also one day about the flagship product, which was not translated into all the languages I wanted. So I was pushing and pushing and pushing for 6-9 months, and they go, no, we don't want to do it. And I just ended up saying, why? It's just 10,000. It's the flagship product. Why won't you do it? And the reason was sales enablement wasn't ready. We didn't have the technical infrastructure, and the company needed to build a data center in the region. So that's all. So your business case can't work if the whole organization cannot actually execute.
Yeah, in fact, and that helps a lot with learning what not to do. So now let's talk a little bit about what it looks like when localization stops reacting and starts leading. So how do you go from being reactive to being part of the conversation before a decision's even made? Let's start with Winnie.
Sure. So to move from reactive to strategic, you first have to build trust before you ask for a seat at the table. So, and that means becoming a partner that product, engineering, S&O, and marketing teams know they can rely on early. A big part of that comes down to reputation. So when teams trust your guidance, they start inviting you into roadmap and design conversations before key decisions are locked. So one practical way we've done that is through tooling. We try to make localization feel seamlessly embedded in the product development process instead of sitting in a separate silo. So when teams have connected tools and clear workflows, localization become part of how teams build, not an extra step at the end. And we also try to make life easier for product and engineering teams. So better IETN tooling and automations can save engineers time, reduce rework, and help teams launch globally with fewer issues. And this is real business value. And over time, you build allies. So when S&O and engineering partners see that localization help them move faster, avoid mistakes, and create a better customer experience, they become the people who actually advocate for localization even when we're not in the room. And that is when the shift really happens from being asked to react to being trusted as part of the decision-making process.
Yeah, Jerome, why don't you jump in? How do you become part of the conversation?
Well, it's something that takes time. It's really a marathon, and you need to be seen, you need to be heard. And to do this, you need to regularly expose your work cross-functionally. So that's the usual business meetings you do every quarter, your QBRs. And the more you do these things, the more people know you. And sometimes there are meetings you're not invited in. And if there's someone in this team, in this call, who knows you, then you have your mole in a way in this meeting. And then you see this is the moment when your dynamic shifts and you become an important piece of the puzzle because someone speaks about what you do on your behalf. And this is, I think, the turning point for me when I started realizing that we were seen as not only just translators, but people who are actually bringing something to the table. There's ways we found to be visible, and simple things like we had globalization champions across the company. So we recognize all the stakeholders that were working with us, and that was from marketing, from sales, from IT, anyone. And every year we had globalization champions, and we managed to get that announced in the company newsletter. So that gives us visibility for people who started asking, who are these guys? Oh, we have a globalization team. What do they do? I got contacts by this, through this, actually. And these recognitions were nothing. It was just a PDF saying you were a globalization champion, but people were actually really proud of this. That was funny. So what we then did was do the same thing for products, but it was a scorecard. So I call it also a name and shame, because we were giving grades to each of the products that we were supporting, from bronze to gold. And that was based on 100 different criteria, if more than 100, 150 something. Like, is this product UTF-8 enabled? Do you have the budget secured? How is your stakeholders' reactivity? Do you have tickets in Jira? Do you have classification in Jira for our globalization work? And I would show this to the chief product officer, and that triggered always good questions about why is this product still in bronze? What is it that you're trying to fix? Because it's been in bronze since last year. This is also a way of getting visibility. The last thing we did was work from the source, which is give guidelines to engineering and UX. So we've built this huge playbook of what to do, what is globalization, how do you address right to left languages, how do you ensure that the user input is correctly taken into account in your system, all of these things. So tools, procedures, file types, structures, everything was described so that we could automate the workflows that goes with it. So this is where we would direct all the newcomers in the engineering team. We told the managers of this team, this is one of the reads you need to give your new employees when they start with you as engineers. They have to read this so that they do the right thing. And actually, if you give this robust framework to work with, engineering will give you the buy-in you need.
Yeah, and building those allies internally is huge. But there's also a real tension to navigate, especially right now, between selling AI efficiency to leadership while keeping your team's trust. So how do you balance building the case for localization with executives while also bringing your team along, especially when there are real concerns about AI and job security? Starting with Kenny.
Sure, yeah. I just want to say, Jerome, that totally resonates with me. We call them loc allies at Tinder. So definitely agree with everything you said. But when it comes to AI, I do think, at least at Tinder specifically, we do lean into a human first approach. Because of the nature of our product, it is dating. It's super personal when people go into it. So my personal philosophy as the lead of the team is that, AI is really here to help us do our jobs more efficiently. But our team, ultimately, we are a human first team. And our team has actually been praised in the company for being one of the most AI savvy teams, which, is great. We're not necessarily looking to AI ourselves out of our jobs, right? Which I think a lot of people are scared to is going to happen, right? Instead, we're focusing on automating what we can in order to find efficiencies. So, how can we make our lives easier, but also the lives of the people that we work with easier? For example, before it would take our program managers hours to clear out our queue, right, for job requests. But now with the push of a button, we've basically created a system where AI solves 10 tickets at once, right? Checking all of the systems to make sure that everything's in place and connecting to everything that we needed to connect to. Obviously, with direct supervision of our team, we know AI is not perfect. But what that does is it allows us to continue that always on work that we know we have to get done, but also allows us to focus on, cultural consultations, which is something that we do for all of our company initiatives. So that really shows our senior stakeholders that we're driving value in all of the work that we're doing. So really shifting that mindset from AI is coming for us to how can AI help me be more efficient and do my job better.
Yeah, Winnie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I also resonate with Kenny's, and I think the balance is being honest with both sides. So with leadership, we have to show that AI can create real efficiency. It can speed up workflows and reduce manual work, lower costs, and help us scale. But we also have to be clear that AI alone does not replace everything. So human judgment still matters, especially when it comes to culture, brand voice, customer trust, and market nuance. With the team, the message has to be just as clear. So AI should make our jobs easier and more strategic. If it remove repetitive work, it gives us more time to focus on the work where human expertise matters most. So the middle ground is use AI where it creates efficiency, but keep humans at the center where quality, context, and judgments matters most. So that is also the stories that help build executive buy-in without losing the trust of the team.
And that balance is so important to get right. And it all connects to the bigger vision. So let's close on that. We have just a few minutes, but I'd like to hear from all three of you if we're able to. When it works, when the org actually starts treating localization as a strategic function, what changes? Jerome.
Well, I would like to answer this question in reverse. What happens if companies don't treat us as strategic? Well, one day I had to let a project fail to just let management experience what it feels like not to be at the table early in the process. Because if you get there early, you save money, you get faster time to market. Once leadership experience that you're no longer at the dinner table only, you're at breakfast too. So this is where you can make the biggest impact. And I remember a product which was a standalone product. The company wanted to move it to a mobile version. And I was brought in even when before the first line of code was written. And I remember internationalizing the product completely, all extended Latin characters, right to left, Cyrillic, Japanese. 6 months after the product launch, they asked me to localize into Japanese. We got that done in 3 weeks because I was able to do all the necessary testing in Japanese as early as possible in the process to fix the bugs that I found at the time, even before the product was an alpha version. So in the end, when you get to the point where you're strategic, you have less friction when it comes to budget, to expand the team, expand the number of products you're supporting, the tools you need, and the attention you have. You have a seat at the table.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, for us, globalization now or our team is part of product strategy. So instead of being asked to translate features, we're now part of the conversation early on about whether a feature makes sense globally or how it should be adapted for global users. And that's where we can actually start to drive growth. And, we, again, have this local allies across the company. And from the top down, people are like, hey, does the team have a seat at the table? Like, we need to bring them in. So we're getting that early on exposure. And we build, for global by default. We, start early and we embed ourselves in every single team to make sure that we're included in the conversations.
Yeah, and we have less than a minute left here, but Winnie, do you want to wrap us up with your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that Kenny and Jerome has pretty much said everything that I want to say. So thank you so much.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you all for lending your perspectives. What really strikes me about this conversation is that the real work of localization isn't in the strings or the word counts. It's in the relationships, the reframes, the moments where you make someone else's problem your own. So thank you to all three of you. The next time someone asks what localization is worth, we all now have the language to answer that question. So again, thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of the conference.